I was folding laundry when Thomas's phone buzzed on the nightstand. He never left it behind, not even for a minute, not in 40 years. But that morning, he forgot it in his rush for his daily jog. It lit up again while I was smoothing a pillow. And the name said Rachel, underneath the words, "Miss you, honey?" Jason keeps asking when Daddy's coming back. I stared at the screen like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. "Jason, Daddy?" My hands were cold before I even touched the phone. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever discovered a truth you wish you hadn't. My name is Barlene Whitaker, but everyone calls me Barl. I'm 65, and I live just outside Portland, Maine, in a brick house Thomas and I bought when Hunter was still in diapers. Back then, it was a stretch, but we made it work. I sewed curtains from old sheets and grew vegetables in the backyard so we could save every dime. Thomas poured into his father's small construction firm we believed in, work over flash, kindness over charm and family. Above all, my husband built Whitaker Construction from a 3-man crew into a name every builder in New England knew. He was respected, sharp always in a suit even on job sites, and Hunter, our only son, grew up in that world of contracts and cement. He followed Thomas like a shadow, went to the same college, took the same parking spot at the office to him. I was just the one who packed lunches and sent birthday cards on time. It didn't hurt. Then, not really. I told myself it was enough to keep things running at home, but I started noticing little changes. After Thomas hit 60 more out-of-town meetings, more evenings spent at the office or with clients, I ignored the signs like you do when the truth would cost too much to see until that morning. That message and the photographs it led me to in his phone were pictures of a woman, maybe 15 years younger, holding a blonde boy in her lap. A boy with Thomas's same dark blue eyes, birthday cakes, fishing trips, Saturday mornings on a front lawn. I'd never seen. I memorized that house without even meaning to. A white fence, toys on the porch, a place that looked lived in, loved. In that afternoon, I told Thomas I was visiting my friend Darlene in Rockport. He didn't ask which one. He barely looked up from the paper. I took the second car and drove past that same white fence. I saw her, Rachel, coming home, with the boy in a backpack. And an hour later, Thomas pulling up in his silver Lexus with groceries and flowers. I watched as he picked the boy up like it was the best part of his day. Spun him in a circle, kissed Rachel like they were 20 and newly in love. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even get out of the car. I just sat there, and a thought emerged through the fog. One steady, quiet thought. He's built 2 lives, and one of them is paid for with my silence. The next morning, Thomas left early for the office. Bacon toast, black coffee, same breakfast as always, same kiss on the cheek, same leather briefcase tucked under his arm. I watched the door close behind him and didn't move for a long while. When I finally sat down at the table, I opened my laptop. I typed the name Rachel along with Jason in Maine. The search returned dozens of names: teachers, therapists, yoga instructors. But when I clicked one photo, I stopped cold. Same woman, same boy, same house. Rachel Cobb, age 38, first-grade teacher at Pleasant Street Elementary in Biddeford. The house was modest white with navy shutters and a small swing set out back. There were pictures of her and Jason at the town fair at the beach, carving pumpkins on a porch I'd never seen. The next day, I told Thomas I was visiting my cousin in Camden. He barely looked up from his tablet. I took the car we rarely used and drove down the coast. Rachel's house was just as it looked online: neat lawn, small garden chalk drawings on the driveway. Around 3:15, her sedan pulled in. Jason climbed out, backpack bouncing against his back, and ran up the walkway. A light flicked on in the kitchen window. 10 minutes later, a silver Lexus pulled up. Thomas stepped out holding flowers and a grocery bag. Jason raced into the yard and leapt into his arms. I watched the porch light glow warm behind them as the door closed. For the next week, I watched. Not always from the car, sometimes through the paper trail Thomas didn't bother hiding. Credit card statements, Venmo transfers, school payments. I made a spreadsheet of every dollar he sent to Rachel's household from our joint accounts. I also noticed how often he made excuses. Business dinners, evening board meetings, golf retreats with clients. I tracked the addresses he used for those trips, matched them to Rachel's street, her local grocery, the school calendar. Meanwhile, at home, I moved through the days like normal. I folded laundry, baked cornbread, texted with Paige about the twins' spring recital. No one asked how I was. They rarely did. Hunter called twice. Once to ask about the family trust, and again to confirm Sunday dinner. He always made sure I knew his schedule, never the other way around. I noticed how his tone changed depending on whether Thomas was in the room. With Thomas, he was confident, polished, like a junior partner at the firm. When it was just me, he talked slower, louder, like he thought I didn't understand. Paige never visited without calling first. Her voice was always pleasant but careful. She once called the guest bathroom dated loud enough for me to hear. When I gave the twins handmade scarves last Christmas, they said thank you at the same time and went right back to their phones. None of that surprised me. Not anymore. But something else did. I wasn't sad. I was angry. And beneath the anger, I felt still. Clear. I didn't want a dramatic divorce. I didn't want shouting matches or sympathy casseroles from the neighbors. I wanted something that would last, something that would mean I was never invisible again. 10 days after I read the first message on that phone, Thomas told me he'd be gone for the weekend. A golf trip with 2 partners from Boston. He said it like he always did, expecting no questions. I told him to have a good time. The moment the front door closed, I picked up the folder I'd been building. Then I drove to see a lawyer. His name was Vincent Pritchard, office in downtown Portland. A tall man with thinning hair and a wall full of degrees. He greeted me like I was anyone else, not like someone's wife, not like someone's mother. Just a woman who had come with questions. "What can I help you with, Mrs. Whitaker?" "My husband has a second family in Biddeford," I said. "He's been supporting them with marital assets. I want to know my rights." Vincent didn't blink. He pulled out a legal pad and listened while I talked. "You've been married 40 years, he said when I finished. "Under Maine law that entitles you to half of all marital property, including the business even if it's in his name." He asked what I wanted. "Divorce compensation?" "Want control," I said. Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Of the company, 51%, enough to protect myself if he dies. Or leaves. Or does what I think he's planning to do." He leaned back in his chair and tapped the pen against the desk. "That's bold," he said. "You'll need leverage? I have it." I handed him the folder. Photos, emails, account statements. A copy of a check to Jason's school written from our joint business account. Phone logs with Rachel's number. Notes from the dates he claimed to be out of town. Vincent turned a few pages, then nodded. "You'll need more. Witnesses. Proof of intent. But this is a good start." I asked what would happen to Rachel and Jason if this went public. "Legally," Vincent said. "They're not entitled to anything beyond child support, and only if paternity is proven. Rachel isn't a legal spouse. She has no claim." I paused, then asked, "What if I don't want a divorce? What if I want compensation for my silence?" Vincent didn't answer right away. "If we structure it correctly," he said. At last, it wouldn't be blackmail. It would be an agreement, a transfer of stock in exchange for continued discretion. I nodded. Good. He wrote out a plan. We'd gather more evidence. Draft a contract. Keep it clean. Make it look like Thomas was securing my future out of loyalty and concern, not guilt. When Vincent asked what to do about Hunter, I said nothing. He didn't know. At least, I didn't think he did. But that would come later. For now, I had work to do. I spent the next week gathering what Vincent needed. Photos of Thomas entering Rachel's house. A school flyer with his name listed as Jason's emergency contact. Receipts for furniture deliveries that matched Rachel's street. Every night, I hid the folder beneath a blanket in the back of my closet. Every morning, I reminded myself this wasn't about getting even. It was about taking back what was already mine. The documents were nearly ready. Vincent told me to wait until Thomas was home, comfortable, unworried. I chose a Tuesday. One where he wasn't traveling. One where the house was quiet and there would be no interruptions. We had dinner like usual. Chicken rice, a bottle of wine. He talked about a new contract with the state. Something about bridge materials. I nodded and passed the salt. After dishes, we moved to the living room. I brought out the folder. Thomas reached for the remote. "What's that, Rachel and Jason?" I said. He froze. His hand hovered, then dropped to his side. He didn't speak for a long time. When he did, his voice was steady. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. "And I've brought proof." He poured himself a drink. "Didn't offer me one." "Divorce?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want 51% of Whitaker Construction. Or this goes public." He turned pale. When I showed him the contract, his hand trembled. But he didn't argue, just stared at the floor and said, "I underestimated you." I said nothing. 3 days later, Thomas died of a heart attack. And our son, who had no idea what I'd done, would soon try to take everything for himself. But I wasn't done yet. Thomas died 3 days after signing the papers. One minute, we were drinking wine in the living room. The next, he was on the upstairs landing, clutching his chest. I called for an ambulance and stayed with him until they arrived. He was still breathing when they took him out on the stretcher. At the hospital, I sat in a hard plastic chair, staring at the tiled floor, while machines beeped somewhere behind closed doors. The doctor came out 2 hours later. A kind woman with tired eyes and a calm voice. She said they did everything they could, but the heart attack was massive. Thomas was gone. 68 years old. It was a strange feeling, like someone had pulled a rug out from under the world, but I was still standing. The funeral was held at St. Andrew's, just north of Portland. The church filled quickly. Businessmen in suits, city officials, board members. The mayor came. So did a senator from Augusta. People shook my hand and called Thomas a visionary, a pillar of the community, someone who built something out of nothing. Hunter sat beside me in the front pew. He didn't say much. His hands were folded jaw tight, eyes fixed on the casket. Paige and the twins were behind us. Lily fidgeted with the hem of her skirt. Seth kept glancing at his phone until Paige gave him a sharp look. To them, this was just another event. Formal, expected. I didn't see Rachel. I wasn't sure if she'd come or if she even knew. Jason would have been too young to understand what was happening anyway. After the burial, people followed us back to the house. The catering company set up folding tables and filled the living room with trays of food. I poured coffee, offered plates, smiled when someone made a kind remark about Thomas's legacy. An old golf partner told a story about Thomas helping him refinance his home. A contractor from Saco mentioned a deal from 20 years ago that kept his business afloat. Everyone had something to say. No one said anything I hadn't heard before. Later in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Hunter pulled me aside. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand. "We should talk," he said quietly. I followed him into Thomas's office. The door clicked shut behind us. The room still smelled like cedar and the aftershave Thomas used. His chair sat empty behind the desk. The same desk I helped pick out from a catalog almost 30 years ago. Hunter walked to the bookshelf, pulled down a small oil painting of a sailboat, and unlocked the safe behind it. Inside was a thick manila folder. Dad left everything organized, he said, placing the file on the desk. He made sure there wouldn't be any delays or questions. He opened the folder and pulled out a set of documents. His tone was measured, like he was walking me through a business transaction. The company goes to me. He set up a trust a few years ago, so there's no probate. The house, most of the accounts, they're in my name now. But he did leave you something. He slid a separate envelope toward me. The cottage in Kennebunkport, a comfortable sum in cash, enough to keep things simple. I looked at the envelope but didn't open it. Hunter continued. I've already talked to a realtor. There's a buyer interested in this house. High offer. It's a good time to sell. He said it with a smile, like he was helping me out of a chore. And the company, I asked? Expansion, he said. Dad was too cautious. We've been talking to investors in Dubai. There's a plan in place. It's solid. He handed me another document, a release form. My name was typed neatly at the top. This is just a simple agreement. Says you're voluntarily vacating the house. You don't need to sign it today, of course. We'll give you a few weeks to pack. I placed the document back on the desk. Do you plan to live here? He shook his head. Paige doesn't like old houses. We'll stay in Biddeford. This place is just a good asset to let go of. He said it like he was reading off a checklist. He didn't look at the photos on the walls, the furniture, the floorboards we'd refinished ourselves after a leak in '92. What if I say no? I asked quietly. Hunter blinked. What if I don't agree to this? His face shifted just slightly. A twitch of confusion, then a smile. Mom, this isn't personal. Dad made all the arrangements. It's done. He leaned across the desk and took my hands in his. You don't have to worry about anything. I'll handle the details. You just focus on resting, enjoying life. I pulled my hands back. Thank you. I'll think it over. Of course, he said, satisfied. He stood and walked me to the door. Before I stepped out, I turned back. You remember what your father always said about contracts? Hunter nodded. Never trust a deal until it's signed and filed. Right, I said. Good advice. I went upstairs and closed my bedroom door. Then I called Vincent. He thinks the company's his, I said. He has no idea. Vincent's voice was calm. The reading of the will is on Wednesday. Let him believe it a few more days. I looked out the window toward the driveway. Hunter's car was still parked at an angle. More consultants would arrive tomorrow. More papers, more plans. Let him enjoy it. It wouldn't last. On Monday morning, Hunter arrived before 8. 2 men in gray suits followed him inside without knocking. They nodded to me in passing, then disappeared into Thomas's office. I heard the door shut behind them and the sound of papers being shuffled. When I asked who they were, Hunter said they were financial consultants. We're finalizing a few transitions, he added. Don't worry, Mom. Everything's under control. By mid-morning, 2 more cars pulled into the driveway. More men in dress shirts and briefcases entered through the front door, as if it were a corporate lobby. They set up laptops in the dining room. Voices echoed through the hall, firm and confident. The house, which had been silent just days earlier, now buzzed like an office tower. Just before noon, Evelyn arrived. Her eyes were red, her blouse wrinkled. She had worked for Thomas for over 20 years. She found me in the kitchen and spoke in a whisper. Mrs. Whitaker, Hunter's letting us go. Me, Ronald Patrick, everyone who's been with the company longer than 10 years, he says it's time for a restructure. I reached for her hand. I'm sorry, Evelyn. Truly. She swallowed and looked down. Thomas always said loyalty mattered more than credentials. But your son? The office door opened. Hunter stepped out, saw us, and frowned. Evelyn, I thought you were packing. I just came to say goodbye, she said, straightening her shoulders. And to tell your mother that your father would be disappointed. Hunter gave a tight smile. My father understood that change is part of progress. That's why he built a company worth modernizing. Evelyn didn't respond. She walked past him, her heels quiet against the tile. When the door closed behind her, I turned to Hunter. She gave 20 years of her life to this family. Did you really need to fire her? She was loyal to Dad. That's not the same as loyalty to the company, he said. I need people who align with my direction. He didn't wait for me to reply. The door closed again behind him. The next few days followed a pattern. Hunter arrived early, stayed late, and brought more people each time. He moved between rooms with a clipboard speaking into his phone referencing investor names I didn't recognize. I stopped trying to ask questions. By Friday, Thomas's office was no longer a private space. It had become a boardroom. Whiteboards leaned against the fireplace. Legal pads covered the coffee table. My dining room was filled with building plans and foreign contracts. I overheard Hunter on the phone one afternoon. He had stepped into the garden thinking I couldn't hear. Yes, Mom's still here. For now, he said. But I've already lined up the buyer. She'll be out before the end of the month. I backed away from the window and stood still in the hallway. He hadn't seen me. On Sunday, he stayed for dinner. The first time we'd eaten together since the funeral. He poured himself a glass of wine and carved the roast as if everything were normal. We're restructuring some departments, he said between bites. It's nothing serious, just efficiency. Evelyn told me people are nervous, I said, worried about losing their jobs. Hunter waved his hand. People fear change, but once they see where we're headed, they'll come around. What about the contract with the state, I asked. Thomas said that project was important. Hunter looked up. We're moving away from that. Government contracts are slow and the margins are tight. We're focused on Dubai now. Private investors. Higher stakes, higher return. I didn't respond. That night, I made a call. Ronald Ferguson picked up after the second ring. His voice was tired. Ronald, it's Barl. Good evening, he said. I've been meaning to call. Things are changing fast. What's going on? Hunter's replacing the leadership team. He's brought in people from his old firm, finance folks. No experience in construction. He's canceled 2 long-term projects and is trying to refinance part of the company to fund expansion overseas. Is that dangerous? It's a gamble, Ronald said. Thomas always kept things conservative. Hunter's taking risks we've never seen before. I thanked him for the update and promised to stay in touch. On Tuesday, while Hunter was at a board meeting, I met Vincent at a cafe near the harbor. Everything's in place, he said. The will reading is set for tomorrow. The estate attorney already has copies of the share transfer. Will Hunter challenge it? I asked. He might, but the paperwork is solid. Tristan signed everything voluntarily. There's a video. A notary. Witnesses. Your position is secure. I nodded. Should I warn him? No, Vincent said. Let the reading happen in front of witnesses. That way there's no room for interpretation. That night, Hunter came home in a celebratory mood. The board approved all my proposals, he said. We're launching a new green product line. I told you vision matters. He reached for the wine again. By the way, the Kennebunkport house is ready. You should start packing. So soon, I asked. Business doesn't wait. Besides, this place holds too many memories. You'll be happier in a quieter town. I didn't argue. I just watched him raise his glass and toast to the future. Tomorrow, his future would look very different. The next morning was clear and cool. I ironed a blouse, combed my hair, and set out for the attorney's office downtown. Gerald Howard's name was etched into the brass plate beside the heavy wooden door. I arrived 10 minutes early. Hunter was already seated at the long conference table when I walked in. Paige sat beside him, perfectly styled, tapping her nails against her phone. Across from them was Miles Pearson, the company's corporate lawyer, and to my surprise, Ronald Ferguson. "Mr. Ferguson," Hunter said tightly, "I wasn't aware you'd be joining us. I was named as a witness in your father's estate," Ronald replied, settling into a chair. Hunter gave a tight nod, but didn't say more. Gerald Howard entered with a leather binder and a careful smile. He sat at the head of the table and looked at each of us before speaking. "Thank you all for coming. Today we'll be reading the last will and testament of Mr. Thomas Whitaker, dated March 15th of this year. This document outlines the distribution of his estate and holdings. As required, I'll read it aloud in its entirety." He began with the standard language. Page after page of formal phrasing clauses and signatures. Hunter sat relaxed, one arm draped over the chair beside him. He looked like a man ready to claim what he believed was already his. When Howard reached the section titled Distribution of Assets, he paused, flipped the page, and cleared his throat. "To my son, Hunter Whitaker, I bequeath 20% of the shares in Whitaker Construction currently held in trust. Additionally, the secondary property in Kennebunkport and its contents are left to him in full." Hunter straightened. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Howard continued. "The remaining assets, bank accounts, household belongings, and personal investments have been addressed in supplemental documents." Hunter raised a hand. "Wait, that doesn't make sense. My father held 70% of the company." "What about the rest of the shares?" Howard looked over his glasses. "At the time of Mr. Whitaker's passing, he held only 19%. The majority interest, 51%, was transferred 3 days before his death." Hunter leaned forward. "Transferred to who?" Howard reached into the binder and pulled out a separate folder. "To his wife, Mrs. Barleen Whitaker." There was silence. Hunter turned to me, face pale. What Howard laid a notarized document on the table. "Here is the signed and witnessed stock transfer agreement. Your father voluntarily transferred controlling interest to your mother. The transfer has already been registered with the corporate office." Miles leaned in, examining the paper. "This wasn't included in the filings I reviewed." Howard nodded. "It was processed separately and independently of the will. Legally binding, fully witnessed. There is also a video recording of the signing." Mr. Ferguson was present. Ronald spoke up. "Thomas was clear and calm that day. He said it was a matter of principle that Barl deserved security after all these years." Hunter stared at me. "You knew." I didn't answer. "You manipulated him," he said, voice rising. "You waited until he was weak, then took the company out from under me." I met his gaze. "Your father made the decision. He wanted to protect what he built." "You've never worked a day in that business," he snapped. "You don't know the first thing about managing a company." I said nothing. Hunter stood up, fists clenched. "This isn't over. I'll fight this. I'll prove he wasn't in his right mind. That you pressured him." Howard raised a hand. "You're free to contest the transfer in court. But I must advise you, the documentation is thorough. The medical records confirm full mental capacity at the time of signing." Miles leaned back in his chair, flipping through the documents. "If this holds," he said slowly, "Mrs. Whitaker owns the majority stake. She holds the voting power on the board." Hunter looked stunned. "You let me believe this was mine," he said quietly. "You sat there during the funeral and let me think I was waiting," I said. "For today, the official reading." He didn't speak. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Then he gathered his briefcase, looked at Miles, and said, "We're leaving." Paige followed without a word. Once the door closed, the room was still again. Howard turned to me. "There are a few more papers to finalize. Shall we?" I nodded. Ronald stayed behind to help. He drove me back to the house afterward. When we pulled into the driveway, Hunter's car was already there. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Ronald asked. "No," I said. "This is family." I stepped out and walked to the door. The sun was low behind the trees. Inside, the house was quiet, but I could feel the tension waiting on the other side of that door. Hunter wasn't finished. But neither was I. Hunter was waiting in the living room when I walked in. His briefcase was on the floor beside the coffee table. He didn't stand when I entered. He just looked up at me and said, "You blindsided me." I didn't answer. "You sat there through the funeral, through the meetings, through every one of my plans, and said nothing." I walked to the hallway, slipped off my coat, and hung it neatly on the hook. When I came back, he was still staring at me. "I made those decisions because they had to be made," I said calmly. "You left me no choice." "You're not qualified to run a company," he said, "and you know it." I sat down across from him. "You're right. I'm not a CEO. But I'm not stepping aside either." His jaw clenched. "I'm not walking away from what's mine. You may have the majority now, but I still own a fifth of the company. And I still know it better than you ever will." "Then act like someone who cares about what Thomas built," I said. "Because if you keep pushing the company toward debt and reckless expansion, it won't survive." He stood up abruptly, paced once to the fireplace, and back then stopped in front of me. "You're going to regret this," he said. I stood too. "No, I won't." He left without another word. The next morning, I called Ronald. "We need a board meeting," I said. "Emergency session. I'm not waiting for Hunter to start dismantling things." He agreed and said he'd help arrange it. The meeting was held the following afternoon in the Whitaker Construction Boardroom downtown. I hadn't been in that room since the holiday luncheon 2 years ago. Back then, I was just Thomas's wife, seated at the edge of the table, smiling politely. This time, I took the chair at the head. Ronald sat to my right. Across from me were 3 directors Hunter had appointed weeks earlier. The others, those who'd served under Thomas, watched me with cautious eyes. I opened with a short statement. "I'm not here to overturn everything. I'm here to protect this company's foundation. My husband believed in quality, reputation, and long-term stability. That's what I'm bringing back." Then I asked the board to vote on removing Hunter as acting CEO. There was a pause. Then Ronald raised his hand. So did Ellen McCauley, a longtime executive Thomas had trusted. Then one of Hunter's appointees, Wes Langley, nodded slowly and lifted his hand. "I didn't sign up to crash a company in 6 months," he said. "I'll support the motion." The vote passed. Hunter hadn't even shown up. I moved to the next item. Patrick McKenzie. I said has been with this company for 15 years. He served as Thomas's deputy and helped design our last 3 municipal contracts. I'm nominating him as interim CEO. There were no objections. When the meeting ended, I returned to the office I'd claimed, smaller than Thomas's, tucked in the back corner, but quiet and mine. I called Patrick that evening. "I'm not here to micromanage you," I told him. "You do the work. I'll watch the numbers." "I understand," he said, "and thank you." I didn't expect to be asked. You've earned it. The next morning, I showed up early, walked the floor, talked to the staff, thanked the employees who stayed. Rehired 2 who'd been forced out. Some were polite, some were cautious, but they saw I wasn't there for show. Ronald walked me through the financials. He explained the revenue breakdown, the cash reserves, the project backlog. Evelyn returned that week and resumed her seat outside the CEO's office. She handed me a binder the size of a phone book and said, "Everything your husband kept on record. Every vendor, every client, every contract, going back 10 years. She paused. He'd be proud of you. I nodded. Thank you, Evelyn. Word spread quickly through the building Hunter was out, Patrick was in, and the new majority owner was showing up before 9 a.m. By June, the mood had changed. The Dubai deal was officially dead. The local government project, long delayed, was reinstated. We focused on a line of environmentally friendly materials, something Thomas had once drafted plans for but never funded. It launched quietly, but demand picked up faster than expected. We weren't flashy. We were steady. Hunter, meanwhile, filed a suit in probate court. He claimed the stock transfer had been signed under duress, that I'd coerced Thomas during a period of mental decline, that the video and paperwork were orchestrated to rob him of his inheritance. The judge set a date. Vincent represented me. We submitted everything: the video of Thomas signing the documents, medical records, showing he was of sound mind, statements from the notary and from Ronald. The judge took 1 week to issue a ruling. The transfer stood. Hunter lost. That same day, I called Vincent again. I want to offer him a buyout, I said. Clean and fair. He's a shareholder, and that gives him influence I don't need hanging around. Vincent agreed. We made the offer through legal channels, market value plus 20%. Generous, quiet, binding. A week passed, then a response. Hunter accepted. Ronald called to explain. He's out of cash. His investment firm's in trouble. The court case drained him. We finalized the deal at the end of July. His shares were transferred, payment issued. Just like that, Hunter was no longer part of Whitaker Construction. I thought that would be the end of it. But early August proved otherwise. That night, as I pulled into the driveway after a long day, I saw a familiar car parked beneath the maple tree. Hunter was sitting on the porch steps, elbows resting on his knees. We need to talk, he said when I stepped out of the car. I nodded, unlocked the door, let him follow me inside. Hunter followed me into the living room and sat in the same chair where Thomas used to read the paper each morning. I left the lights low. The house had been quiet lately, and I'd grown used to the peace. Would you like something to drink? I asked. He nodded. If you have whiskey. I poured him a glass and set it on the coffee table. He took it with a soft thank you, then stared into it for a long moment. I came to apologize, he said. For everything, for how I acted after Dad passed, for the things I said to you. I didn't speak. I wanted to see where this would go. I was wrong, he continued. I thought I knew what was best. I thought I was the only one who understood the company, who deserved to lead it. But I see now, I didn't understand the whole picture. He looked up at me. I underestimated you, Mom. I sat down across from him. What changed your mind? He gave a small, dry laugh. You did. The last few months. I've been following the quarterly reports, the employee updates. Clients are staying. Some have come back. You and Patrick have turned things around. The new product line's smart, practical, and the team actually respects the leadership again. I nodded slightly but said nothing. Hunter leaned back in his chair. My firm's barely holding on. I overextended, tried to grow too fast. We've lost clients, and the lawsuit drained more than I expected. I'm dissolving the company next month. I rested my hands in my lap. The air between us felt heavy with what wasn't being said. I'm not asking for sympathy, he added. I need to start over. And I was hoping you'd let me come back. Not as a partner, not as an owner, just as part of the team. I'll take whatever role you see fit. I studied him for a moment. And what would that role be? I asked. Business development? he said quickly. That's where my skills still matter. I can help grow things again locally this time. Steady, no outside investors, no overseas dreams. Just good work. I looked toward the window. The roses I planted in June were blooming against the fading evening light. When your father died, I said, still facing the glass, you took over this house like it was already yours. You held meetings in the kitchen. You handed me relocation papers at the memorial dinner. You spoke about me to your wife like I wasn't in the room. I turned back to him. He lowered his eyes. I didn't stop you back then. Not because I agreed, but because I wanted to see how far you'd go. Hunter nodded slowly. You talked about loyalty, but you cleared out half the staff before the flowers from the funeral had wilted. You told Ronald he was outdated. You called Evelyn a relic. And you told me I was too old to understand the business. I know, he said, and I was wrong. I stood and crossed to the sideboard, poured myself a glass of water, and sipped. When I discovered your father's second family, I could have made a mess of everything. I didn't. I handled it quietly, with care, because I respected what he built, even if I didn't respect what he'd done. I turned to face him again. I could have fought you in public, called reporters, given interviews. I didn't. I know, he said. You showed grace, and I showed none. There was a silence. Then he looked up at me with tired eyes. Can I have another chance, Mom? Not to undo what's been done, but to help make something better. I need it, and I want to earn it this time. I sat down slowly. I believe you're sincere, I said. But sincerity isn't always enough. Your presence in the company right now would shift everything. People would question decisions. They'd wonder who's really in charge. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. And even if you came in as just an employee, you wouldn't stay that way. You'd expect more. You always do. And it would pull focus from the work that's being done. His hands curled into fists, resting on his knees. So that's it. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm protecting what we've rebuilt. He stood, took a slow breath, and nodded. You've made up your mind. I have. He looked at me, really looked, and for a moment the boy I remembered flashed through. The one who used to sit on Thomas's lap, watching him sketch out blueprints on a yellow pad. You're stronger than I ever realized, he said softly. I had to be. He turned to walk to the door and paused. You'll regret this, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, I said quietly. I won't. The door clicked behind him. I stood in the hallway for a moment, then returned to the living room. His glass was still half full on the table. I poured it down the sink. The days that followed felt quieter than I expected. I moved through the house with a new sense of peace, sometimes pausing by the front window, sometimes lingering in the backyard where the roses grew taller each morning. There were no more tense meetings, no voices echoing from Thomas's old office, no urgent phone calls to lawyers or board members. The house belonged to me again, not just as a caretaker, but as a woman finally writing her own story. I kept busy with the work I'd come to love. Patrick and I checked in by phone most mornings, reviewing updates, celebrating small wins, and sometimes reminiscing about Thomas in the old days. Evelyn brought over coffee once a week. She always had news to share about employees who felt secure again, clients who'd decided to stay, and new hires who said the place felt like home. There were days when memories of Hunter's childhood would surface, him chasing fireflies in the yard, or sitting cross-legged at the kitchen table building models with Thomas. Sometimes I missed the boy he'd been, but I didn't linger on the son who tried to take everything the moment he could. Some things you let go not out of anger, but because you learned to make room for what's next. By the end of August, I stood on my porch one morning and realized how much had changed. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in decades, my life felt like it truly belonged to me. I made my own choices, big and small, and found comfort in simple things from tending my roses to planning a trip I'd always put off. The world felt wide open, not because it was easy, but because I'd come through the storm and found myself whole on the other side. If there's one thing these past months have taught me, it's that justice doesn't always arrive with noise and drama. Sometimes it's quiet, a gentle reclaiming a door you finally learned to close, or a chance to walk forward carrying only what matters. I found my strength not by fighting louder, but by standing steady, listening to my own voice, and trusting that kindness and dignity would see me through. Wherever you're listening from, I hope you find a bit of yourself in this story. Whether you're starting over or simply holding the line when it matters. Thank you for joining me. If this touched you, I hope you'll share your thoughts or stories too. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truth.